Gale is a part-time regional minister with the Eastern Baptist Association, is the chair of Churches Together in Cambridgeshire, and one of a number of associate chaplains at Anglia Ruskin's University's Cambridge campus, which serves about 10,000 students and staff. Gale is a member of the university's chaplaincy council, which gathers together senior management, representatives of faith bodies and representatives of students and staff, which meets regularly to review the university's progress in living out its commitment to offer a holistic vision of education for the flourishing of the common good. That sounds like a very exciting task, Gale. Gale is also an ecumenical canon of Ely Cathedral, and we're just really, really glad that you're with us this evening, Gale. Thank you for joining us.
It's great to be here.
So tonight's panel discussion is looking at kind of convergence of a few things. So that the main thing is about being a Baptist in the public square. Do you want to say a bit more about that, Gale?
Yeah, I think as some of what we've been sharing so far today, chaplains in so many different spheres are at the forefront of seeing some of the results of policies and practices that leave people sometimes in some very vulnerable situations. And so there are opportunities, which we'll hear more about later, to share, to witness as to what we're seeing and to call for action and for change. And so I'm hoping we'll have some rich conversation this evening as we reflect on what that looks like in our different sectors. And as you've said, what our Baptist identity brings to that, bearing in mind our non-conformist roots. So yeah, I think there should be some rich conversation, certainly hopeful.
Very much looking forward to it. Looking forward to seeing how other people comment as well. So who do we have? We have Nik Hookey. Nik has served in local church ministry for 19 years and entered hospital chaplaincy 4 years ago. He now works as chaplaincy manager for Manchester University Foundation Trust, which is the largest NHS trust in the UK. Nik is also studying at Luther King House on their healthcare chaplaincy course. It's great to have you with us, Nik. Thank you for being willing to do this. We've also got David Masters. David Masters is the part-time pastor of Central Baptist Church in Southampton and the Free Church Faith Advisor for Solent University. He's part of the Baptist Chaplaincy Forum, which we've mentioned a few times today, as the higher education representative, and is the Baptist family representative on the church's higher education liaison group. He's a volunteer member of staff at Spurgeon's College and has been involved in lots of chaplaincy expressions since the 90s because he enjoys talking about life and faith with people beyond the church. Thank you for joining us too, David. And then finally we have Heather Marsden. Heather Marsden had a background in local government with Suffolk County Council and then trained for ministry at Spurgeon's College. She was then the senior minister at Rushmere Baptist Church in Suffolk for 10 years and found it very surprising to be called out of that into prison ministry in 2021. She now leads the chaplaincy team in a large Category C training and resettlement prison in Hertfordshire, housing approximately 1,030 male prisoners and 300 staff. So it's great to have you all with us. I'm going to let you get on with it. I feel like I've done my Jeremy Paxman bit, introducing everybody. You may hear Tim's disembodied voice if there are particular stuff in the chat that kind of bears fruit and would be good to add to the discussion. But we're really looking forward to hearing what you've all got to share with us this evening.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. So we're going to kick off with the first question, which is, what does engagement in the public sphere look like in our different sectors where we are chaplains? So I'm going to suggest that we start with Heather.
Okay, what does it look like to be involved in the public sphere? Well, being a Baptist chaplain specifically, well, I'm included as a free church chaplain in the prison service. They don't really recognise the differences between the non-conformist denominations. But in a way, it gives me a fresh voice there because Church of England are considered the real voice of the church within the prison service. And at one time, all the managing chaplains were Church of England, were ordained priests. So the fact that I'm there at all really is a fairly recent thing. But it does mean that when I bring a voice to the table, because I'm part of the senior management team on the prison, at the prison, reporting to the #1 governor, when I bring that voice, it's not only the only Christian one around the table. Oh, there's one other Christian on the board now, but it's also a fresh voice in that it's not the one they're used to. It's not one that's loaded in. This is not a criticism in any way, but it's different to that one, which was more focused on tradition and ritual, and people would have lots of questions about why certain things were done a certain way. And I feel I can bring a certain freshness as a free church chaplain, but not having all of those things to clear out of the way, to get to a more simple voice that speaks into the secular world. I'm a civil in a civil service organisation, so I do feel a bit of a lone voice, but I think being a Baptist one is quite freeing as a fresh Christian voice. Does that make sense?
It does. And I've got some questions, because I'm thinking you're in a prison setting, Nik in a health one, David and myself in a higher education one. So thinking about the prison setting, where are the opportunities to engage in the public sphere? So we get a real insight into that.
Well, I think it's because I sit on the board, on the senior management team, is where they make policy choices for that particular prison. And we have a voice back into the regional team and into government ultimately about how the priorities amongst prisons, the emphasis on different areas. You know, there's a huge emphasis, for instance, on getting prisoners out of cell and into meaningful activity to bring them skills that they can use when they go out. So I'm always banging the drum saying, don't forget that although the plastering courses and the electrical courses and the bricklaying courses are excellent and we must do them and resource them properly, don't forget that we also need to resource getting the prisoners out to chapel, to Bible study, to the mosque, to meet the pagan chaplain, whatever their faith is. We need to nourish it and give opportunities to do that. Without my voice around the table, I don't think, or not only me, but the rest of my team, I think that voice could easily slip away, especially because during COVID, during lockdown, something which had never happened before in the prison service, as far as I'm aware, was that the services, the church and the Islamic services, all the faith services shut down, as they did outside. And I think what's happened is that to some extent, it's given the prison service permission to close services. And indeed, at the moment, we're not yet fully open in terms of faith services every week because we haven't got enough staff to serve it. So I think one thing our voice can bring, my voice can bring as a free church chaplain, is the importance of prioritising faith in this secular grouping, in this secular establishment, where it's not valued generally by the decision makers, by the senior managers, because they and many of whom don't even understand why we're there at all.
Okay, great, Heather. I'm going to say, can we hear from Nik in the health sector? Tell us, what does engaging the public sphere look like there?
I suppose it kind of comes in a number of different ways. So as a manager, I kind of have involvement with again some of the senior management in the trust, and so I'm able to kind of bring a distinctive kind of Baptist Christian witness in the way that I behave, in the way that I follow the trust values, in the way that I kind of am an embodiment, a kind of representative of Christianity generally in the workplace. I'm also part of the LGBT staff workforce group, so that means that I contribute to discussions that go directly into HR, and so that affects all the staff that we work with, and that was particularly important during COVID again because there were health inequalities from COVID that affected LGBTQ people as well as BAME people, and so we had to kind of bring a distinctive emphasis in order to try and make sure some of those policies that had to be written very quickly were actually addressed to the workforce. So it's a kind of within the staff system of the hospital, that kind of an influence. And then in terms of kind of the patients, again, because I'm a manager, I don't tend to do many of the routine visits to patients. So all the patients I see are when I'm on call. So they do tend to be very, very poorly. Most of them are dying or have died. But again, it's a kind of, it is the public sphere, because most of those patients that I would get called to are people who perhaps don't have a particularly active faith, because those who are kind of part of a worshipping community would probably ask for their pastor or friends from church to come in. So it does tend to be the people that are kind of clinging on to faith, perhaps from childhood, and 50 years, 90 years later, but they know that they want somebody to be there to say prayers, either as they're dying, or it may be that the families say, actually, we want somebody to come and say prayers now that our dad, our granddad has died, and we want there to be someone there. And you have this kind of micro window almost. You get the phone call, you go to the hospital, and you don't know any of the people that you're there with, so you have to get to know them very quickly, and be able to kind of minister in a way that suits that particular situation. So it's kind of a very, very personal, and then kind of very, very corporate in many ways, is the way that my kind of public involvement works.
Okay, thanks, Nick. And Dave, what about you?
For me, I'm the minister of a church in a community that is 98% students. So I actively went looking to the university to become part of their team, really, to offer my services. And so one of the things that I've been doing when I've been working with them is kind of challenging an unimaginative utilitarianism. So this is what we want you for, and we'll give you a call when we want you. Okay, but there are other things we can do to help. Really? What can you do? So we helped the university win a national award for recycling. We have offered to assist the university meet its crisis targets. We have been ringing the university in advance of major national events and saying, is there anything we can do in the university to help you deliver to the hundreds of international students? We'll have no idea what's going on, or actually just be able to be a listening ear to the large number of people that you have queuing up for counselling services. They might not actually need proper counselling, but they might just need someone to talk to or talk at. So trying to be an active rather than a passive presence, being that salt, being that light, because we're there, we're different. And trying really just to be a good witness in all of this. Can I reflect a little bit on Baptist stuff, Gale?
Yep. You can lead on to that. Yep.
So many years ago, in a land far, far away, I did a talk for a new manager coming into chaplaincy, and I was asked to speak about free church, not necessarily specifically Baptist, but because they were in a Baptist church and we were having the meeting used to have meetings in different places of worship so that people got out, experienced, understood where people were coming from. I spoke about Free Church Alliance. I spoke about the difference in approach from Anglican and Catholic churches and free church churches, and how we're much more relaxed and much more grass-rooted in our communities. And we talked about, and the one thing he really wanted to talk about was multi-faith. He wasn't interested in all this other stuff. And I said, well, part of the origins of our Baptist history are the fact that we have this commitment to conscience. Thomas Helwis. Thank you very much indeed. going to prison for the right of Muslims and Jews to have their own faith, and then dying in the Tower of England because he says the king has no right to tell people what to believe. He was much happier after that. Not Thomas, obviously, but the manager was much happier after hearing that, after coming into a church for the first time, in his words, 30 years, and not sure what to expect, because it was like unlike anything I'd ever come across before.
Indeed. So thanks, Dave. So definitely some references to freedom of conscience and religious freedom being core to our Baptist heritage, for sure. I want to dig slightly deeper on what engagement in the public sphere looks like as I think about my own context, also in higher education at university. And I can think of sitting as part of the chaplaincy council that brings together senior management, staff representatives, faith group representatives, and having to address things like government guidelines on free speech, the prevent regime with regard to terrorism. I can also think about us talking about some of the challenges around homelessness. Again, there was news coverage a few months ago because of challenges around affordable accommodation to rent. There were a number of students finding themselves having to sofa hop and so forth. So universities having to mobilize and think about how they address this, particularly when you're talking about international students. Cost of living crisis, policies around, interestingly, there's an initiative of £1 lunches at university. So again, places like the Chaplaincy Council trying to really ensure that some of the stuff we're seeing on the ground students are facing, that we are raising those things, pushing back sometimes. There's been stuff around differences in attainment gap around ethnicity and people of different religious and faith backgrounds. There's some meaty, gritty stuff, I think, that we're engaging with in our different sectors, and trying to reshape policy and practice both within the institution and pushing further afield in terms of pressure on government making changes as well. So we're dealing with lots of stuff, and we've begun to talk about the Baptist dimension, but I want to push even further. So apart from freedom of conscience, what other things? I'm thinking about priesthood of all believers, communal discernment, searching the scriptures, all those good Baptist principles. And I'm sure there are more you can think of. How does our Baptist identity come to bear in this engagement in public square? So this time we're going to go to Nik.
Thank you, Gale. I guess one of the things about freedom that we hold so dear is that it's that we're able to. I'm able to kind of take that into discussions around kind of equality and diversity, and when there are particular needs for people. So we've just had Ramadan, and we've needed to ensure that staff have got appropriate breaks and that they've got the appropriate food during the night so they can eat that when they have their iftar, when they break the fast. For our Jewish patients, there's a massive number of Jewish patients and citizens in North Manchester, and so we see them in our hospital, and some of the staff just don't know. They don't even think that this patient might need to have kosher food, and that actually it's incredibly undignified to give them a ham sandwich, or even a sandwich actually particularly during Passover. And so it's being able to have an influence in some of those places as well, where it's perhaps more cultural than spiritual or pastoral. And so I think that's really helpful too. I can see that David wants to come in, so I'll shut up for a moment.
Dave?
One of the issues that I've come across is I think it's a multi-spoke thing, but if we start off with the whole idea of religious illiteracy, that people simply do not know what they believe, let alone what their friends and neighbours and colleagues believe. So working with student groups, trying to explain how to share your faith in such a way that you don't come across as you're banging people over the head with the Bible. I'm sure there are groups out there that will teach them how to do that. That's not the way I would suggest they do that in this particular setting, because particularly in HE setting, I'll leave that one open for argument, that the concept of freedom of faith has become freedom from faith. So actually saying to people, you know, you do have members of staff who go along to church. No, of course we don't. Yeah, you have at least 2 senior lecturers that I know that worship locally. And you have students who will come looking for churches. They might not stay in them for very long, but they will come looking for them. So actually trying to help people develop a fuller understanding of what it means to be human by exploring a bigger idea of their humanity, i.e. the faith component, I think is really important.
Okay, so I'm going to hear from Heather, and then I wonder if we've got anything coming in from the chat. So Heather, your thoughts?
I think some of the things the other guys have said have been really helpful and have resonated with me, much more so than when I was in a church setting. Maybe we'll come on to that and the difference between where we are. I would say more close, well, with fingers deeper into the public sphere pie, if that makes a sense. I think because, for instance, when I was working as a church leader, almost everyone I worked with and most people who came to the church, apart from specific outreaches, were Christian. Now, the people I work with are mostly not Christian, mostly without a faith, mostly not really understanding why faith could possibly be important, except for my multi-faith team, who are from a wide range of faiths. The prison service recognises a very long list of religions, and it's our responsibility to provide for all those spiritualities. So the inclusivity aspect of what we do and the being immersed in a very diverse area, I think Nik touched on the LGBT area and the need for us to be involved in that. It simply wouldn't be an option for us to be exclusive in the setting that we're in. It would, if we voiced that sort of opinion, and I know this is probably controversial for some, but we would be excluded from the conversation. And I think the whole inclusivity, the whole working together with other faiths, and for the prisoners that we have, and I'm focusing mainly on prisoners, although we do have ministry to staff as well. The inclusivity of what we bring is really important for them because they are excluded in so many ways from society that I think the Baptist background of that inclusivity is really important.
I can see from the chat that something has come in with regard to strikes. So as chaplains, how are we engaging with the striking that's taking place in a lot of the institutions that we're serving in? I don't know. Who do we want to start with? Nik?
Might be a bad person to pick because our trust, actually, the nurses haven't gone on strike, although the junior doctors have done. So we've had them on strike in the past week, and it's been one of the quite amusing thing has been that there's been lots of emails and stuff going out to consultants that we get copied into, saying, well, we've got this new computer system and you've left your junior doctors to use it, now you've got to use it. So here's a simple guide to how to use the computer. And you kind of think, wow. So yeah, I mean, in terms of striking, obviously there's been a lot of conversations at work, and people have been discussing that, the various different unions that are represented. I'm part of one of those unions as well, and my union didn't particularly ask us to strike. I mean, I don't think striking chaplains would have much influence on government policy, unfortunately. But certainly, you know, we've been asked to accept or reject the pay offer, and you have to kind of think, well, how do we respond in that small circumstance? Where do we cast our vote? Is it about casting a vote for peace, or is it actually thinking about justice to some of those healthcare workers, you know, on band 2, band 3, who are really struggling? And at work we've had we have a food bank collection. We've also had to set up a kind of we've got a staff rest a kind of what do they call it, a refuge, and we've had to stock that with food now because there are people coming to work who actually haven't got enough food, and so they've been able to go in there and either get food for their lunch or food to take home. I did hear of one trust, I think it was up in Newcastle, where the chaplaincy actually had an influence on the management such that the canteen were providing free breakfast for staff as they came to work. So yeah, there are those issues. I mean, in terms of kind of coming up close against strikers, the most I've had is the junior doctors shouting outside my window, but they got there after I'd got to work anyway, so I didn't have to cross the picket line. So maybe that others have had more experience of actually kind of bumping into striking workers. But I think with the new vote that the RCN are asking for, then there is obviously the potential that the nurses will go on strike in our trust, and it is a huge, massive trust. And I think that's probably why they didn't quite meet the threshold to go out and strike beforehand. But if the national strike introduces that, then it will have a massive impact on Manchester.
Okay, so just thinking about public engagement again, thinking about speaking truth to power, thinking about our Baptist identity. It's not always, if we think of a priesthood of all believers, it's not always about, as chaplains, having a voice ourselves and speaking up ourselves. It's also about equipping others to be able to speak up with regard to the conditions that they find themselves in. So what does that look like, say, Heather, in your context, equipping others to speak up, truth to power?
Well, there's two aspects of that, I think, for me that come to mind. And one is that one of the other speakers mentioned the fact that we're just coming to the end of Ramadan. That's a huge operation in the prison. And of course, the decision makers and the senior managers are generally not Muslim and don't have a lot of understanding about what's important in it. But they are very respectful and want to make it right, want to do it right. And it has been handled very well. But I think one of the things I've been able to do, and I think my Baptist roots help in this, a part of the inclusivity, the priesthood of all believers, sort of the levelling stuff. I've been able to champion the imam and to give him a voice and to cheer him on and to say that, yes, this is important, and to enable him to have a louder voice. So I think that is a way in which we've spoken truth to power about what really is important. Although they already had a listening ear, I must say, they weren't resistant. They just needed guidance about how to make it happen. So that's one of the ways. And another way that we do in chaplaincy, not particularly because we're free church, but is to give a voice to prisoners who have no voice, who may say, oh, I've spoken to the officers 10 times about this and no one ever comes back to me, or people say they'll go, just things that happen in a large organisation, and that we are able to take some of those tricky situations and have a word with someone who might hear it from us where they wouldn't hear from a prisoner. So in those simple ways, we are able to give a voice to those who have little voice.
Okay, so I'm going to move the focus slightly to begin to think about how, as chaplains, we can bring a voice and action of the public square back into the life of the union. And I'm going to go to Dave, but before I do that, Dave, I've got a quote for you to ponder. So this comes from Professor Jason Arday, recently appointed a professor at Cambridge University, made the news because of his story about not speaking until he was almost an adult. So a real groundbreaking appointment. And this is a quote from him. Universities portray this veneer of egalitarianism, fairness, equality, and diversity, but are actually one of the biggest facilitators of inequity. So, thinking about that quote, you may or may not agree, Dave. I would say I think he's got a point. looking at things like the attainment gap I've mentioned as well, between people of different religious backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds. We could break it down in terms of so many ways, and referring to some of the institutional practices, policies that actually enable some of this. What, from your experience, can we bring back in terms of voice and action from the public square into the life of the union?
Well, nice, easy question. Thanks very much, Gail. Appreciate that. Bless you. Actually, I find myself agreeing a lot with that. As someone who is mildly dyslexic, spent most of my academic career, felt like working 10 times harder than everyone else, and not really getting any support or encouragement as I'm really trying to figure out what else is it to say question me? 1,000, 2,000, 3,000. I kind of see it a lot. Now, my context is quite different from Heather's and Nik's, is that I am a local church minister working in a community full of students. So I get people who come and tell me their sob stories. I get staff who come and tell me their sob stories. And I have told, advised, listened, supported both staff and students to quit, because it is too much. It is too demanding. Just referring back to the whole striking thing, we have had strikes at my university, but what is interesting is there's not a lot of people on the strikes, because an awful lot of people have already left because they can't afford and can't sustain the workload anymore. We're seeing student numbers drop because they don't think they're getting a quality product. I say that carefully, because they're paying a lot of money now for something from an institution that is at the bottom of a pecking order, to the very bottom of the ranking in the country. They're choosing to go elsewhere. The international students aren't coming as often as they used to. So this, again, the university is getting hit there, and it's making step by step, little by little, everything that little bit more difficult. And so one of the things that I've done, and I can only speak for myself because I'm one member of a team, is that I have sent emails, made telephone calls, just like Heather has, spoken up on behalf of other individuals and said, did you know this person is drowning, not waving? Did you know this person is actually at the end of their tether? And did you know how close this valuable team member is really coming to quitting?
Okay. What I'm hearing from you, Dave, is the potential for raising awareness amongst those in our churches. I think some of what we see and experience as chaplains, many people in our pews, depending on our church, don't really know what's going on the ground, the impact of some of the policies and practices, as I say, both institutionally and wider than that. So there is an opportunity for perhaps for us to feed back some more of that, so people are aware, so that more people can mobilize, take action, respond, speak truth to power, all those things that we're mentioning. And I think based in a university, it's interesting because you have student groups, you have staff groups, and they often have networks, student societies that campaign, and there's a role for chaplains in helping to resource that, build that up, in part of that mobilizing. History shows us so often reform or demands for change has actually risen up from that kind of student group. Think about some of the great movements, whether it be South Africa or other places we can think of. Actually, that young adult sphere in education has been an important place. So there's something about how we build up, how we equip students in those spaces, but also staff networks who are currently striking. How do we help them have a voice? How do we share that within our churches, our pews, and so forth? I'm going to ask Heather to say a bit more in terms of what we can bring back to Baptists Together as a whole, in terms of engaging in the public square. That's one of our goals as a union. What do chaplains bring, or potentially could bring, to help strengthen our engagement in the public square?
I think there's a step before that, you know, I've only been in the prison service for 2 years, and until then I was in church leadership in Suffolk. And speaking personally, although I'd preach a sermon series leading up to a general election or something like that, you know, get involved in political questions, but I didn't really recognise the fact that I needed to know about engagement in the public square. It wasn't something I was thinking I must find out more about, I must address. And I think partly that's because we're given lots of things that are important to consider. Mission, of course, which it is. Mental health, which of course is vitally important. All these things are really important. But engaging in the public sphere and knowing what the big policy issues are, I haven't got space for that. It wasn't important to me enough. It wasn't in part of my agenda, my thinking enough to engage with those things. So I think before we talk about how chaplains might bring something to it, there needs to be a forum to bring it to. There needs to be listening ears to hear it. Otherwise, we're just another voice that's lost amongst the melee.
So as we think of our definition of mission, think about missiology, is there a challenge as to how people are understanding it? Where does justice, for example, sit within our understanding of mission? Surely it's integral, it's part of it.
Yes, absolutely. Can I just say something that, well, joining the prison service, of course, justice has really upped in my thinking, and wider issues of inclusivity, some of which we've touched on, are really coming up the agenda. And I think within the Baptist Union, some of the discussions that are going on at the moment are in that vein. And I think that will open the way to look at broader issues that affect the whole of society and not just our Baptist Union or even just the church. So I think the discussions we're having on other matters at the moment are bringing justice matters to the fore. And certainly for our population within the prisons, there are huge issues of injustice, not only the obvious ones where people may feel that they shouldn't be in there, but I mean the way they're treated and the priority or lack of it they're given in society. Where is our priority as Christians to look at rehabilitating prisoners, to giving them a fresh start when they come out of prison? Sadly, I sent, when I was in Rushmere as the minister, I was just putting my toes in the water around prison ministry. I knew that a prisoner was going to be released into the area in which I was ministering in the whole town. So there was a Baptist church, Baptist ministers, or at least maybe 20, I suppose, where there was more than one in the church. And I put out an email saying, this prisoner is being released in our area. Will a church offer to take them under their wing? I had no responses at all, which is quite shocking. So I think we need to be aware of the need. We need to have a heart for justice that is broader than it has been in the past.
Indeed, and I can see in the chat people are referencing joint public issue team, for example, as ways in which we engage as a union. But I think what you're highlighting, Heather, and I think it's also some of my experience, is that on the ground at grassroots levels, there's a lot of our church members, or a significant number at least, that aren't engaging or seeing the significance of some of these issues and matters and seeing it as a justice issue that actually we are called to engage with as part of God's mission. So I think there's some really perhaps strong pointers about the need to consider how we are discipling people within our congregations around their understanding of mission and where the place of systemic inequality and injustice sits within it. Nik, as we move on, conscious of time, just thinking about our Baptist Together family, and a question around how do you think our Baptist family might better invest in chaplains as representatives of our movement, our Baptist movement in the public square? What can Baptists Together do for chaplains?
Well, that's a nice big question for me. I think some of the things that have changed in the last few years, I think, have been a really positive development. And you know, when I trained for ministry 25 years ago, you couldn't train in a chaplaincy setting. You had to go and do your 3 years in a church before you could then be seconded to chaplaincy. So that's been really good that has now changed, and that actually being in chaplaincy isn't seen as secondment. But there are still tensions. We're supposed to be a member of a local church, and so you find a local church to try and be a member of, and you say, I'd like to be a member, and they say, well, we don't see you. And that's because you're working on a Sunday in the hospital, so you're very rarely off and able to be in the church. But also, there's that kind of, we were talking just a moment ago about feeding back into the people of God, really, in the kind of a local setting, and it makes it difficult to actually share in that local setting when you're kind of viewed a little bit with kind of suspicion, I think, by the congregation. They're like, oh, why isn't he in church more often? Whereas somebody who's in a local pastorate is not expected to be a member of another church somewhere. So that's kind of quite different. I don't really know what the answer is to that, because obviously ecclesiologically, I firmly believe that I should be a member of a local church, but it is just very difficult to do that and express it in a way that others would express it. So yeah, I think that there are some things that could change. I think maybe using chaplains more perhaps in some of the discussions that go on in the Baptists Together more widely, because we do bring a wealth of experience of working in the public sphere. So we are facing many of these issues every day. A couple of years ago, some of us wrote to the Baptist Union asking for there to be more diversity training on racial justice, and that's come about, and that's brilliant. But that's something that it's been mandatory training in the health service for years, and no doubt in the prison service as well, for years and years and years. There's all these kind of really good examples of good practice that are there in the public sphere that we could actually bring back to Baptists Together. So kind of using us as well as kind of valuing us, I think.
So Dave, and then we'll go to Heather. So Dave, I recognise I'm saying this as a regional minister, part-time regional minister myself, so I work in an association. What needs to change regionally, nationally, to enable chaplains to be better resourced and be able to be a better resource to Baptists Together?
I think there are 3 or 4 things we need to take quite seriously. Can we talk about finance? Am I allowed to swear like that?
Not allowed to swear, but
thank you very much indeed.
Finance.
Because the reality is it costs money to put a chaplain into a situation, and not all institutions can afford to do that. Home mission funding, it would be interesting to know what the percentage of home mission funding is spent on chaplaincy and how much is spent on regional ministry. Sorry, Gale. But it would be interesting to see if that percentage could perhaps possibly maybe be increased. And that's only one extra post. That's still one extra post in mission in a needy situation. One of the things I would like to see, if we used to have home mission Sundays. Anyone remember those? Yeah. How about a chaplaincy Sunday? Where actually a chaplain, be it from the waterways, from the prisons, from the hospitals, from universities, from schools, from FI, from HE, are given the opportunity to give some feedback. So Nik can perhaps take that Sunday off and speak in his local church. This is what I do, and this is why you don't see me on a Sunday. And I think the last thing I would like to say is that chaplaincy is now incredibly diverse. On the screen at the moment, you have a whole range of different flavors and approaches to chaplaincy. I wonder if we include things like street pastors, detached youth work. Do we recognize those as having a chaplaincy function? Are we helping and supporting those people in doing the work they do? I live in a student community that is 98% of the students. I tell you what, the police have actively said, we wish there were more street pastors on your streets on a Friday night because we can't get enough people there. So I'd like to see the sheer diversity of chaplaincy expressed, not just, sorry, Nikki, sorry, Heather, the full-time ones, not just those who were in leadership positions within their institutions, but actually the volunteers on the outskirts who are doing the little bit that they can at the times that they can, when they can.
Yeah.
Okay, so Heather, we're going to go to you. I mean, one of the things I'm hearing is Nik talked about some of the challenges of engaging in local church. So I'm wondering our understanding of church and how it operates, how that might need to change or be more flexible to enable chaplains to engage. Sunday church, for example, there are different expressions and forms of church that meet at different times and places. So is there some flexibility around that? But beyond that, what are you seeing, Heather, as things that need to change in order, as I say, for chaplains to be better resourced and be a better resource for Baptists Together?
Well, just on that note of being part of a church, I think that works both ways, because as far as I'm concerned, we have church in the prison. We have, there's prisoners in the band, there's prisoners in the congregation. Most of us are prisoners. And I have a mandate to go out and be part of another church, but I would say, let's have more of the local church coming into our situation and being salt and light there, and learning from the prisoners who often have a wonderful faith and an understanding of the grace of God that many of us will never approach. So it's a two-way thing. I don't think it's a matter of me going out and being fed and bringing it back. It's a matter of the other way around too. There is so much resource there, so much to be learned, and certainly about justice matters, about the grace of God matters, about, where is love stops and starts? Well, it doesn't, does it? But sometimes I think in churches we can just trip up on those sorts of things. So I'd say it's two ways. Another thing about local associations, I'm really accepted and could not be more welcome in my local association, which is Central Baptist. They're great. But for me to spend half a day of my civil servant time to go and go to their meeting, it's going to be 95% focused. No, that's not fair, but at least 60% focused on how to manage in a local church in a Baptist setup, which of course, and that's absolutely right, because that's what most people there need to be involved in. But for me as a chaplain, I can't really spend that time doing that, but I do need to be nurtured by being with other ministers, especially working in an environment where I'm mostly not with Christians. I don't know the answer to that, but that is a challenge, I think, for chaplains. I think another thing related to that is it would be helpful if regional ministers, supportive as you are, had more training about chaplaincy. And this day is great, but I think for people who are not in chaplaincy to have more training and understanding about what is involved and experience of the diversity amongst us, which is huge. But we're all working outside the usual structures of Baptist churches, and that is a challenge without the support that comes for that. I think it was Nik mentioned the fact that trainees can now train for the Baptist ministry in the chaplaincy context, and I have a minister in training with me at the Mount. But what I would say, and I don't want to speak about him in particular, but in the general terms, if you go training to be a Baptist minister, I was blessed by my local church when I was sent to Spurgeon's. They paid all of my fees, they paid my travel expenses, and I know that's not the experience for everyone, but it seems to me that in that sort of context, sometimes chaplaincy is not considered to be the main thing. It's sort of, we'll support you, we'll buy you some books, we'll maybe pay you travel, but it's not like a sending out in the same way as if you're called into ministry. I'm speaking fairly narrow experience, but I wonder if others think that might be the same. So in upping the priority, the face of chaplaincy in terms of the missional purpose of the Baptist Together, the justice arm, the inclusivity arm, that if we could be championed and have a greater profile of being influential and key players in that, I think we'd get more support, more resourcing, and we'd be seen in a different light, which in turn would give us a louder voice in the sphere in which we work.
Okay, thanks, Heather. I think you made some really important points. I particularly like the idea of people coming into settings where we are, institutions, and learning. You know, some of the skills that you grow and learn around things like interfaith engagement, ecumenism, all those kinds of things. I often say to people, being a chaplain, you know, some of the issues we talk about in local church, some of the challenges in terms of Christian unity, I sort of say going to a chaplaincy context and it feels like ecumenism on steroids, such as the diversity that you're working with plus interfaith engagement. So I'm really excited by the idea of people having opportunities to engage where we are and learning and growing in that way, that exchange, which is wonderful. Dave, I saw your hand up, but I'm conscious that we've only got a limited amount of time left. I'm just wondering, Tim, if there's anything particular in the chat, because I know you were possibly going to come in at some point that we need to address before we have our final sort of point one each in terms of what we want to see in the next 5 years.
There's a massive amount in the chat, and I've been happily taking part in it. I'm afraid I haven't really pulled at any particular thing because there's so many different aspects that have been drawn in. I think at the moment there's the debate is still around this issue of whether chaplaincy is considered in our churches to be somehow less. Interesting comment I see from Ashley about whether chaplaincy is seen as being perhaps how do I put it? Well, let me might be easiest to kind of read it. It says some of that suspicion may be well founded, or at least in my case, some of what I do or say would probably be frowned upon by members of my previous church, refusing to proselytize, supporting the EDI agenda, working alongside a Muslim colleague and not arguing for the uniqueness of Christ. So lots of stereotypes, I think, are being suggested and maybe are problematic. I must admit, you know, that wasn't my experience in the church that I was pastor of, but it's obviously prevalent in some. So that's really where the chat is going at the moment. I don't know if that's helpful to the debate, but that's the direction.
Okay. It seems we're back around this definition of mission. I really think that chaplains have got something to add into understandings around people's missiology. That's one of the things I think we're really picking up on tonight. So Dave, you had your hand up. What did you want to say?
Well, I wanted to plug the SCBA for a moment because they don't, when they have their annual away day, they make sure that there is a regular event for chaplains independent completely from all the other stuff. So chaplains can come away together, have time together as chaplains, and then go and join everyone else for the rest of the celebrations. And I was quite surprised to hear that's not the same for every region. And some regions are clearly doing far better than others. So a standardization of that might be quite nice. Going back to the concept of mission, we are so defined in our culture by come to church, invite people to church. Chaplaincy is about going, and this is one of the reasons why congregations can't get their head around it. Why aren't you going? Why aren't you proclaiming? Why aren't you doing this? Well, because I'm going to try and build relationships with people. So often we have within certainly within evangelicalism an idea of the three-step gospel being the ultimate expression of mission and evangelism. Well, can we kill that, please? There might be a place for the three-step gospel, but you don't use that tool all the time. You don't open your toolbox and find it's full of hammers because your screwdriver is going to be absolutely wrecked. We need to find new ways of communicating mission, perhaps to the 21st century.
Okay, right. So I gave you warning about each of you, something you want to see in the next 5 years to help chaplains, as I say, keep saying it, be better resourced and be a resource, a more effective resource for Baptists together and beyond. We're going to start with you, Nik.
I was hoping I'd be able to hear everyone else, see what they said. One thing in the next 5 years, I think it's it's kind of raising the profile, and it's kind of countering that idea that chaplaincy isn't proper ministry, but actually this is, you know, something that you can go into. You can take all the skills, all the training that you've had, all the experiences that you've had, whether that has been in a local church or not, but you can take that into chaplaincy, and you can do Missio Dei where you are in whatever context you find yourself.
Thank you. Dave?
Just the one thing you say?
Just the one thing.
I would like to see, I mean, I've mentioned the National Chaplains Day, but I would like to see an opportunity put on by the Baptist Union and or the regions that says, come and have a look at chaplaincy. It isn't, you know, church-based ministry isn't the only way forward to serve God. Come and have a look at ministry. Come and have a taster, even if it's just over a month.
Okay.
Shadow a chaplain.
Thank
Do
you,
something that is more proactive about highlighting chaplaincy opportunities, rather than just saying, oh, you can do this module when you get to college.
Thanks, Dave. Heather?
I'm going to hop back to go back to something Claire said earlier on when she was opening her reflection, I think it was. And she said, I've never been a chaplain. I am not a chaplain, and I don't expect ever to be one. And I fully, that resonates with me, because that's exactly what I thought. I never dreamed I'd be a chaplain. So I guess my challenge to this conference and beyond, to take back to your churches is, well, not really to this conference, because I guess you're there, aren't you? But to say to people, you know, have you thought about being a chaplain? Have you thought, are you listening out for God? Because he had to nag at me for a long time before I realized what he was saying. You know, chaplaincy is a real option. It's a wonderful mission and justice promoting opportunity that I think is missed by so many. So let's tell people, let's shout out that this is real ministry. It's we're called into it, and to be listening out to God, whether they might be called, you know, much to their surprise, as I was.
Okay, I'm going to have the last word as chair of the panel, in saying that I intentionally chose being a part-time regional minister and a part-time chaplain, because I felt that there was much I might bring to the role of regional minister while still being rooted in chaplaincy. And I think that as an association, my presence in team meetings across the association as a chaplain in itself has helped to raise the profile of what chaplaincy is. And I would like to see perhaps more associations be more creative in their appointments, because I think the combination has the potential to really be an important resource on the ground to our churches. Some of what you've already said in terms of people taking seriously what chaplaincy is, and the contribution chaplains can and do make. And I would hope and pray that my kind of appointment may be a new one. I know there have been combinations around pioneers in the past. So I hope that we will see more creative appointments like that. But thank you. I hope everyone's found the conversation rich, and I think we hand back to Sarah. Or do I go straight into my next bit, Sarah?
No, that's we'll just take a moment. Thank you so much, everyone. That's been such an interesting conversation, and we can tell by the way the chat's exploded how stimulating that's been for everyone, I would say. So thank you, David, Nik and Heather. And Gale is going to offer us a final reflection and prayer now. Thanks, Gale.
Okay. Just taking a moment of quiet after our rich conversation. And for those of us that began together this morning, we began by reflecting on an image, an unusual image, an image of a crucified Christ, but full of colour, vibrant colour, and bringing connections to the world of carnival. Carnival as in the form it takes in Africa and parts of the Americas, where it's often taking place around the time of Ash Wednesday in the lead up to Lent, and there is a wider theological context to it. And from reflecting on that image by John Lyon, perhaps sensing how chaplains often hold together the pain of Good Friday, the waiting and uncertainty of Holy Saturday, and the resurrection hope of Easter Sunday. As we reflected on that word cloud, and people put their individual words into the Mento system, and we discovered the words challenging and fulfilling as dominant words in that word cloud, we began to understand and embrace that holding together of the pain of Good Friday, the waiting and uncertainty of Holy Saturday, and the resurrection hope of Easter Sunday is challenging, but yet fulfilling. Diane offered us an image of Jesus washing the feet of his disciples. And it seemed to fit so well as a metaphor for how chaplains do deep listening to people where they are at. And is perhaps an example of how, as Baptists together, we need to learn to take off our shoes as we seek to listen to one another and serve one another. We recognize the huge need for hope in this world, and for that hope to flow out of chaplains through the power of the Holy Spirit, as Claire led us in a reflection on Romans 15, verse 13. Hope and joy overflowing through the power of the Holy Spirit, as that flows out of chaplains, the difference it makes, or the potential difference it has and can make. Our keynote speaker, Mark, reminded us that chaplains are more than good listeners, but artists in handling ritual and liturgy, so as to embrace the people we encounter in their vulnerability and mutually partake in theologically informed pastoral care that helps them and those they encounter feel more like the persons God has created them to be in community. Our panel discussions now have reminded us that as chaplains, we are witnesses to the distress and suffering that so many people experience. And it's in that context that we embrace people, that we have opportunities to open our mouths, to equip others to open their mouths too, to declare the need for more humane policies and practices that allow all to be more like the persons God has created them to be. All of this pointing to ways to enable less people to be left languishing in their Good Friday state, crying out, my God, why have you forsaken me? But instead moving towards the resurrection hope that transforms lives and communities, as joy and peace abounds. In the name of Christ Jesus, we pray. Loving God, as we have spent time together today, the image of Christ at the forefront of our minds, the one that we seek to follow, the ways in which we seek to follow. We pray that that image has been strengthened, emboldened, become clearer as we've reflected on what it means to be a part of your mission. Help us to recognize the ways in which our understanding of your mission needs to be expanded and the role that chaplaincy has to play in that expansion. Loving God, May our Baptist family open eyes, hearts, minds to the ways that your Holy Spirit is moving in our churches where there are chaplains and there are members of that same congregation that have no real understanding of the work that's being done, the lives that are being touched. May there be movement in our understanding of church that takes place in unconventional places, whether that's in prisons, in chapels, in hospitals. That is church. May there be a coming together of all those different expressions of churches to renew the practices taking place in our Baptist churches, to give new understanding to what it means to be committed to a priesthood of all believers, to do communal discernment, to search the scriptures. Loving God, we know that you long for more to know, love, and serve Christ and know the resurrection hope that we mark as we find ourselves in this season of Easter. May this day we've spent together be just another piece, another part of that important journey of growing your kingdom, we pray. Amen.